Hey everyone, so today I would like to review Arboreality by Rebecca Campbell. It won the 2023 League Win Prize for fiction, and my first impression is that it's very short, it's very thin, the font size is fairly large, it's only 112 pages long, so I'm not sure if it's being billed as a novella, but I experienced it as a collection of short stories. It is a climate fiction book, which is a type of science fiction about the post-apocalyptic world of extreme climate change where things are crumbling. Characters are trying to adapt as best they can. People are trying to invent new ways of living. People are trying to save portions of their life. They're nostalgic. And it is set in Vancouver Island. So as a landscape designer, an arborist, a plant nerd, I was really excited about this book because I thought it might actually have plants in it, right? It might actually show ways that people are beginning to live off the land. And the thing I'm really interested in is, what is that relationship between people and plants and people and their landscapes, and how does that change over time? And my critique of so many post-apocalyptic books is that they sort of don't think about this part, they just their characters are wandering around this wilderness, and it's and then they ate some greens, or and then they found some bread or ate some bread, and it's where did you get this bread from? What plants are they in season? I want to know. I want to watch your characters foraging, and how does that change their relationship? How does it change their worldview? The way they conceptualize themselves in the world. And I gotta say, this book delivered in a lot of ways. The book discusses forest gardening, wild gardening, more cultivated gardening, medicinal herbs, indigenous practices, but it doesn't shy away from CRISPR gene editing and bioengineering as, not a bad thing as well. I was really excited. As I went to school for landscape architecture, the landscape architecture was actually mentioned in this book, which was shocking. It was in the context of a character finding a book in the library in the landscape architecture section about growing structures out of living plants, sort of like willow fences, where the willows are all growing together and they interweave to form a fence. Honestly, I think that would be in the horticulture section. I don't think landscape architects can really claim that, but I was really happy to see it anyway. So in particular, the main story, the longest story, was really excellent. It tied together climate change, old growth forests, violin building, and music in a way I have not seen before that was really novel. And as someone who's read a lot about this subject, I really appreciated that. It's nice when a story still surprises me, it rings true, and managed to feel both realistic and gritty, but also hopeful in a way without idealizing the future, but without saying, the road, right? It's gonna be all bad, it's gonna be bleak, there's nothing good. So I appreciated the complexity because, the real world is complex. And it's always interesting to me thinking about this kind of world, which is really hard to envision and imagine, by the way. It's what do people miss? What would you miss about your current life and the easiness we have with the world now? And some of the characters miss coffee, airplanes, trips to faraway places, nachos. Yes, I would miss those things. But one of the characters keeps his cell phone in his back pocket even after it dies, and you're I think I would check that thing. I think I would just throw it off into the pond or a bog somewhere, or probably reuse the metal and components inside. But no, I wouldn't do that. There were some places, some aspects I thought there was room for improvement. Particularly in the dialogue, there were a couple of places where I was just confused. I'm going to read a couple of quotes. For example, Mason and Jacob are driving, and a guy gets in their car. So Jacob says, quote, "This is Chris," Jacob said. And then Mason-Chris nodded. So did the guy. And I'm I thought it was the guy who got in the car, wasn't his name Chris? Like, who's Mason-Chris? Like, we already knew who Mason is. I was just really confused, so I moved on a couple pages later. It talks about Mason-Chris again, and I'm like, oh, Jacob is just calling Mason by a fake name. We never learn what this guy's other guy, the guy who gets in the car, we don't know who he is. So I'm like, oh, wow, okay, that took me a couple pages. People frequently speak in these sort of half sentences with a lot of dashes. Like, they don't ever seem to completely finish their sentence or, like, their thought, which can be challenging. So this is slightly later when Jacob asks Mason-Chris to cover the stump, and Mason-Chris says, quote, "Is that really a problem? We're pretty deep in. They still send drones, though. Why would they even anyway, I need to I'll get you when it's time." And so Mason-Chris does cover the stump, which I wasn't the outcome I expected, because I thought I need to do something, I don't know what. So I was a little, like, baffled both by the conversation and the result of the conversation, and this happened frequently throughout the collection. But aside from the dialogue, the biggest issue was that I wanted more. I mean, and that's a great problem to have, right? You got me interested, and I haven't gotten enough yet. And part of that's just because of the form of short stories, right? Even if they're interconnected, you don't get that complexity, you don't get the emotional depth that you'd get with a novel. So with a novel, you expect to spend maybe the first 100 pages, just building, and you know that. With a short story, you want every short story to pack at least a little bit of a punch. And so I really struggled with the first two short stories in this collection. They didn't have that punch, or I didn't buy it. And once I realized later that they do tie in, they're setting the stage, they come back in parts, like, I accept that now, I understand that now, but I'm going to be a little harsh on them, because at the time I was just like, okay, now it's over. So the first two short stories, they're both about isolated older men. The first one is about a university professor who's saving books from a collapsing library. It was read as if it was written in mid-2020, which is fine. Everyone's very isolated. Classes have gone remote. There's a line about people not chatting because the world was dire, and also a line about young people not having pleasure in conversation anymore because the world's falling apart, which, I'm honestly not sure I buy that. In a world that's falling apart, it's like conversation is one of the few pleasures that people have, and one that people, as we've seen, try to get back to as soon as possible. So also, I had a lot of questions. Why is everyone relocating to mining towns in the middle of a climate crisis? Like, why is everyone moving away from Vancouver Island? I'm not sure. Why didn't this guy reach out and get people to help take books out of the library? He was very isolated. It seems like he could have done a better job if he had been less isolated. I didn't get enough explanation for everything that was going on. So that story ends. The second short story is also about another isolated older man who owns a suburban house. He is a native and edible plant geek, which, yes, love that. Happy to see that. And he has a neighbor who's sort of the stereotypical, like, manicured, mowed lawn and Roundup ready guy. And they have, a little bit of a stereotypical, like, back and forth. The local weed inspector comes and is like, your yard's too tall. But then nothing happens with any of that because his neighbor moves away, and then, I don't want to spoiler it here because it's only 30 pages in. I don't think this is that much of a spoiler, but, then a forest fire comes and the guy dies. But I was really confused by this because, like, 4 or so pages earlier, he'd at least been talking about doing a controlled burn, and I thought he'd done one, and so I was like, wait, he's dead? Like, did the controlled burn not protect him? Like, I don't know. we didn't get any discussion about that. Like, did it not happen? I don't know. So I didn't feel very sorry for him, because I was just like, oh, I just met you, bye. So those two were a struggle, and then, then it goes into the main story, the longest story, and that was when it really started to grab me. It's rough having those first introductions be like, they're supposed to be standalone, but they aren't really. And then, so there's these, like, tech bros that appear, and they're really annoying, and I think they're supposed to be really annoying. I assume the author has made them, like, really, really annoying on purpose. And it's like, it's interesting, like, what is the purpose of these tech bros? Are they supposed to provide an alternative? Like, the whole time we've been living in this world where they're integrating, science and art and, like, edible plants and native foodways and, like, habitat restoration, and they're sort of contrasting this with a world where there's, like, these tech bros, and they're just like, what is your carbon reduction today? How many tons of CO2 did you reduce in the past 10 minutes? I mean, it's not quite that bad, but I think it would be really interesting if explored a little further. But again, short story, we can't get there. I want more. And if they were a little less annoying, they're pretty annoying. So nitpicking aside, this book had some really amazing descriptions, and I want to read a couple of them to you. So the first one is, the characters are cutting down this old growth spruce, which I had surprisingly few feelings about. It was also fairly early in the book, and there's this moment. I have felled trees by hand with crosscut saw and axe, and there's this moment where you've gotten through almost all the tree. It's like, I swear, like this much left, right? And you're like, gosh, is it gonna fall over or not? How is it still standing with that little, trunk remaining? And you're just waiting, and it's gonna go, and it's gonna go. And then all of a sudden it starts, like, very slowly leaning and creaking, and then it happens all at once. And there's also something that I think she didn't quite capture, is the terror you feel when you're, like, this close to a tree and it's starting to fall, and you're like, oh shit, I gotta get out of here. But this is the quote on page 37. It's waiting until something inside it tore, and it fell, bounced, a thrash of branches like tendrilled ocean creatures, or waves, like hair, like a body in spasm. Then it was still. Another lovely quote, on page 28, a character is envisioning a potential alternate future. Quote, for a brief, flickering moment, he imagined a world built not of plastic and concrete, but living trees, garden walls formed from intersecting branches, and a cathedral with a roof full of singing birds. Isn't that lovely? Like, there's some really nice moments in this book like that. I also really appreciated the author brought in, indigenous land practices and sort of acknowledged them in the book as well. There were some asides throughout the book that were talking about this. So on page 22, it says, 19th century settlers thought the Salish coast's forest was green and innocent, stretching away from them like possibility. What they did not recognize were sea gardens full of cultivated mussels, or forest gardens rich with crab apples, or oak savannas. What they encountered was a landscape of fire. I mean, like, all these quotes are beautiful, and again, in a novel, like, you could stretch that scene cutting down the tree to half a page, and, it's barely 2 lines. So I would just like to see more. I would like to see the author take on more space. I know it takes a lot of work to write a novel, but I'd love to see one. And, I'd really recommend this book. It's a really fast read. And I really, really do hope to see more books on this topic in the future. If there aren't more books on the relationship between people and plants, I might just have to write one. We will see. Stay tuned, and stay tuned for more reviews. Thanks.